Relax with stories that help you sleep, work, and calm your mind. Today's story is called Summer Romance Painting. We invite you to listen and support our channel by clicking subscribe and receiving channel notifications to conveniently follow the next videos. Sincerely, thank you. The sun hadn't yet breached the horizon when Lia Nguyen stepped onto the damp, cool sand of Santa Cruz's West Cliff Drive. The Pacific Ocean stretched before her, a restless expanse of ink and silver, churning secrets beneath its surface. She tugged her oversized linen cardigan tighter around her slender frame, her dark hair spilling over her shoulders in loose waves, catching the faint pre-dawn breeze. At 27, Lia was a food stylist from San Francisco, her life a meticulous canvas of curated plates and Instagram filters. But 3 weeks ago, her boyfriend of 2 years had walked out, leaving her heart as bruised as overripe fruit. So here she was, 80 miles south, in a place she'd chosen on a whim, a coastal escape to stitch herself back together. Her sneakers sank into the sand as she walked, the rhythm of the waves sinking with her breath. Santa Cruz felt like a fever dream, rugged cliffs, salt-soaked air, and the kind of quiet that made you hear your own thoughts too clearly. She'd rented a room at a homestay called the Driftwood, a weathered beach house perched on a bluff, its walls adorned with mismatched art and the scent of cedar and sea salt. It was the kind of place that promised reinvention, or at least a few days of forgetting. Lia's body was a study in soft contrasts, petite but strong, her legs toned from years of yoga, her hips curving gently beneath high-waisted jeans. Her skin, a warm golden brown, inherited from her Vietnamese roots, glowed faintly even in the dim light, and her almond-shaped eyes, framed by lashes that curled like calligraphy, held a quiet intensity. She wasn't the kind of beauty that screamed for attention. She was the kind you noticed in stolen glances, the kind that lingered in your mind like a half-remembered song. Her lips, full and slightly parted as she inhaled the ocean air, hinted at a smile she hadn't worn in weeks. She didn't notice the figure approaching from the opposite direction until he was close enough for her to catch the faint scent of cedarwood and something earthier, like sun-warmed leather. Theo Rivera was a silhouette at first, his broad shoulders cutting a sharp line against the fading stars. At 30, he was a nomad by choice, a tattoo artist who drifted with the seasons, his life a patchwork of fleeting connections and ink-stained memories. His temporary home was a room at the Driftwood, right next to Lia's, though neither knew it yet. Theo moved with a lazy grace, his long legs clad in faded black jeans that hugged his lean, muscular thighs. His white t-shirt clung to his chest, hinting at the taut planes of his torso, sculpted from years of surfing and sketching late into the night. His skin was a sun-kissed bronze, a canvas of stories etched in ink, a serpent coiled around his left forearm, a constellation of stars dusting his collarbone. His hair, dark and slightly too long, fell in messy waves that framed a face both rugged and refined high cheekbones, a jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and eyes the color of storm clouds, gray-green and piercing. When he smiled, a faint dimple appeared on his left cheek, disarming in its boyish charm. His hands, calloused from hours wielding a tattoo needle, were strong yet delicate, fingers long and tapered like an artist's. Their paths converged at the edge of the beach, where the sand gave way to a narrow path leading to a cliffside cafe called the Salty Brew. It was barely 6 a.m., but the promise of coffee had drawn them both. The cafe was a shack of driftwood and glass, its windows fogged with morning mist, fairy lights twinkling like fireflies. Lia pushed open the door first, the bell jingling softly, and Theo followed, his presence a warm shadow at her back. Inside, the air was thick, with the aroma of roasted beans and cinnamon. The barista, a girl with a nose ring and a bored expression, was wiping down the counter. Lia stepped up, her voice soft but clear. "Can I get a flat white, please?" Theo's voice came next, low and smooth, like gravel smoothed by the tide. "Make it 2. Lia turned, startled, and their eyes locked for the first time. His gaze was unhurried, taking her in not in a predatory way, but with the curiosity of someone who saw beauty in details others missed. Her breath caught, her fingers tightening around the strap of her crossbody bag. Up close, Theo was even more striking. His lips, full and slightly chapped, curved into a half smile, and his scent cedarwood, leather, and a hint of salt wrapped around her like a warm blanket. She noticed the faint stubble on his jaw, the way his eyelashes cast soft shadows on his cheeks, and the single silver hoop glinting in his left ear. "There's only one shot of espresso left," the barista said, breaking the spell. "You'll have to share, or fight for it." Lia laughed, a sound like wind chimes, and Theo's smile widened, that dimple flashing. "I'm not above begging," he said, leaning one elbow on the counter, his body angled toward her. His arm brushed hers, just barely, and the contact sent a jolt through her, warm and electric. His skin was warm, the muscles of his forearm flexing slightly as he shifted his weight. She imagined, for a fleeting second, what those hands might feel like tracing her skin, steady and sure. "Ladies first," Lia said, stepping back, her voice playful but her cheeks flushed. "I need it more." Theo raised an eyebrow, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Rough night?" "Rough month," she admitted, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Her fingers lingered there, nervous, and she caught him watching the motion, his gaze lingering on the delicate curve of her neck, the way her collarbone peeked out from her cardigan. "Tell you what," he said, straightening. "I'll let you have it if you tell me your name." She hesitated, then extended her hand, her nails painted a soft coral. "Lia." He took her hand, his grip firm but gentle, his thumb brushing the back of her knuckles for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. "Theo." The barista slid the flat white across the counter, and Lia reached for it, her fingers brushing Theo's as he did the same. They both laughed, the sound mingling like notes in a duet. "Okay, fine," Lia said, pushing the cup toward him. "We'll split it." They sat at a weathered wooden table by the window, the ocean stretching beyond the glass. The coffee was strong, its warmth seeping into their hands as they passed the cup back and forth, their fingers grazing each time. Lia noticed the way Theo's lips touched the rim, leaving a faint sheen, and her stomach fluttered at the thought of tasting where his mouth had been. He noticed her watching, and his eyes darkened slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the tension simmering between them. They talked small things at first. She told him about her job, how she spent hours arranging microgreens to look effortless. He told her about his art, how he'd inked a lighthouse on a sailor's back the week before, the needle humming like a prayer. Their words were light, but their eyes told a different story. Lia's gaze traced the curve of his bicep, the way his t-shirt strained slightly when he leaned forward. Theo's eyes lingered on her lips, the way they parted when she laughed, full and inviting, like ripe cherries. The sun was rising now, painting the sky in shades of peach and lavender. Lia glanced at her phone, 7:15 a.m., and sighed. I should head back. Long day ahead. Theo stood, stretching, and she couldn't help but notice the sliver of skin exposed as his shirt rode up, taut, bronzed, with a faint trail of dark hair disappearing into his jeans. Her pulse quickened, and she looked away, cheeks burning. See you around, Lia, he said, his voice a low promise. She nodded, her smile shy but genuine. Maybe. As she walked back to the driftwood, the coffee's warmth still lingering in her hands, she felt something shift inside Hera's spark, fragile but undeniable. Theo's face lingered in her mind. Those storm cloud eyes, that dimple, the way his presence felt like a song she'd forgotten she loved. She didn't know then that their rooms shared a thin wall, that she'd hear the soft strum of his guitar through the wood that night, or that their paths would cross again, each time pulling them closer to a summer neither could escape. Back at the homestay, Lia slipped into her room, its walls painted a faded blue, the bed draped in white linen that smelled of lavender. She kicked off her sneakers and stood by the window, watching the ocean churn. Her body felt alive, her skin tingling where Theo's arm had brushed hers. She ran her fingers over her wrist, imagining his touch, those artist's hands, rough yet precise, mapping her like one of his sketches. Next door, Theo sat on his bed, sketchbook open, charcoal smudging his fingers. He drew the curve of a wave, but his mind was elsewhere. On Lia's laugh, the way her hair caught the light, the soft dip of her waist as she'd walked away. He didn't believe in fate, but something about her felt like a tide he couldn't outrun. The morning stretched on, and Santa Cruz hummed with possibility. Two strangers, one coffee, a shared glance that felt like a secret. It was the beginning of something bright, fleeting and achingly alive. The Santa Cruz sun hung low, casting a golden haze over the cliffs and painting the Pacific in shades of amber and turquoise. Lia Nguyen stood on the beach near the driftwood, her camera balanced in her hands, capturing the way sunlight danced on a plate of grilled peaches drizzled with honey. At 27, she was a food stylist who could make the ordinary divinia, single strawberry sliced, just so, a sprig of mint angled to catch the light. But today, her heart wasn't in it. Her thoughts kept drifting to the morning, to the man with storm cloud eyes and a dimple that felt like a secret, Theo Rivera. His name rolled through her mind like a wave, smooth and relentless. She wore a cream sundress that clung softly to her petite frame, the hem fluttering against her thighs in the breeze. Her legs, toned from years of yoga, glowed under the sun, their curves subtle but strong, like a dancer's. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose bun, tendrils escaping to frame her face, brushing the nape of her neck, a neck that curved gracefully, its skin a warm golden brown that begged to be touched. Her lips, full and painted a soft coral, parted slightly as she adjusted her lens, her almond-shaped eyes narrowing with focus. Lia's beauty was quiet but magnetic, the kind that made you want to lean closer, to memorize the way her lashes curled or the faint freckles dusting her collarbone. She didn't hear Theo approach until his shadow fell across her setup, long and lean, stretching over the sand. "You make fruit look like art," he said, his voice low, carrying that gravelly warmth that had lingered in her mind all day. Lia glanced up, her breath catching. Theo stood a few feet away, barefoot, his faded black jeans rolled up to his ankles, a loose linen shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest. The sun caught the bronze of his skin, highlighting the taut planes of his torso, the faint ripple of muscle beneath. His tattoosa serpent coiling around his forearm, a scattering of stars across his collarbone seemed to pulse with life, each one a story she wanted to trace with her fingertips. His dark hair, tousled by the wind, fell into his eyes, and when he pushed it back, his fingers left a smudge of charcoal on his temple. Those hand-scallowed, strong, yet impossibly delicate held a sketchbook, the pages fluttering in the breeze. His eyes, gray-green and piercing, locked onto hers, and the air between them thickened, charged with something unspoken. "Thanks," Lia said, her voice softer than she intended. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her fingers lingering, and caught him watching the motion, his gaze tracing the curve of her jaw, the soft hollow at the base of her throat. Her pulse quickened, a warm flush creeping up her chest. "What are you drawing?" Theo crouched beside her, close enough that she could smell him cedarwood, salt, and something earthier, like sun-warmed leather. He flipped open his sketchbook, revealing a half-finished drawing of the cliffs, the lines bold yet fluid, like the ocean itself. "Just the view," he said, but his eyes flicked to her, a playful glint in them. "Though you're making it hard to focus." She laughed, the sound light and unguarded, and it drew a smile from him, that damn dimple flashing, disarming in its charm. Up close, Theo was a study in contrasts, rugged yet refined, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, his lips full and slightly chapped, curved in a way that made her wonder what they'd feel like against her skin. His shoulders were broad, his arms corded with muscle that flexed as he turned the page, and she imagined, for a fleeting second, those arms around her, pulling her close, his warmth seeping into her bones. They talked, the conversation easy but laced with something deeper. She told him about San Francisco, how the city's hum could drown out your thoughts, how her ex had left her feeling like a dish plated beautifully but left uneaten. He listened, his eyes never leaving her face, and when he spoke, it was about his own kind of loneliness, drifting from town to town, inking strangers' stories onto their skin, never staying long enough to call anywhere home. "Sometimes," he said, his voice quiet, "a stranger hears you better than the people who know your name." Lia nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her camera lens. "It's weird, isn't it? How you can feel so alone in a crowd, but then..." She trailed off, meeting his gaze. "Then you meet someone, and it's like they've been there all along." His lips parted, just slightly, and for a moment, neither spoke. The waves crashed in the distance, a steady rhythm that matched the thud of her heart. Theo's hand rested on the sand, inches from hers, and she noticed the veins on his wrist, the way his fingers curled slightly, as if itching to reach for her. Her own hand, delicate but steady, hovered near his, her nails catching the light. She imagined their fingers brushing, the heat of his skin against hers, and the thought sent a shiver down her spine, pooling low in her belly. They saw each other again the next day, and the day after that, their encounters feeling less like chance and more like gravity. One afternoon, Lia was at the boardwalk, her camera slung around her neck, capturing the chaos of cotton candy and carousel lights. Theo appeared out of nowhere, a paper bag of churros in one hand, his grin boyish and infectious. "You look like you need sugar," he said, offering her one. His fingers grazed hers as she took it, and the contact was electric, a spark that made her lips tingle. She bit into the churro, cinnamon dusting her lips, and caught him staring, his eyes darkening as she licked the sugar away. Her lips, full and glossy, curved into a teasing smile, and she saw his throat bob as he swallowed hard. Another time, she found him on the beach at dusk, sketching on the sand with a sticka sprawling design of waves and moons, intricate and fleeting. She sat beside him, her bare legs stretched out, the hem of her shorts riding up to reveal the smooth curve of her thighs. Theo's gaze lingered there, unapologetic, and when he met her eyes, there was a hunger in his that made her breath hitch. "You're trouble," he said, his voice a low rumble, but he was smiling, and she felt it in her bones, the pull of him, like a tide she couldn't fight. Their afternoons became a ritual, unplanned but inevitable. They'd meet at the Salty Brew for coffee, sharing a single cup like that first morning, their fingers brushing as they passed it back and forth. Lia loved the way his hands moved slow, deliberate, like he was savoring every moment. His fingers were long, the knuckles slightly scarred, and she imagined them trailing down her spine, mapping the curve of her waist, the dip of her hips. Her own body felt alive in his presence, her skin prickling with awareness, her breasts pressing against the soft cotton of her dress as she leaned closer, drawn to him like a moth to flame. One evening, they borrowed a motorcycle from a friend of Theo's, a sleek black thing that hummed with promise. Lia climbed on behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist, her palms flat against the hard planes of his stomach. His shirt was thin, and she could feel the warmth of his skin, the faint ripple of muscle as he revved the engine. Her thighs pressed against his, her body molding to his back, and when the wind whipped through her hair, it felt like freedom, like they could outrun time itself. They rode along West Cliff Drive, the ocean a blur of silver and blue, the sunset bleeding into the horizon. Lia's hands tightened, her fingers splaying across his abdomen, and she felt him tense, his breath hitching. She pressed her cheek to his shoulder, inhaling him salt, leather, and something uniquely Theo, and for a moment, the world was just them, the roar of the engine, and the wild, reckless beat of her heart. They stopped at a lookout point, the cliffs dropping sharply to the sea below. Theo cut the engine, and the silence was deafening, broken only by the waves and their breathing. Lia slid off the bike, her legs shaky, her dress riding up slightly to reveal the soft curve of her thigh. Theo's eyes followed the motion, his jaw tightening, and when he stood, he was close, too close, his body a wall of heat and muscle. He reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face, and the touch was feather-light but searing, his thumb grazing her cheekbone. Her skin was soft, flawless, and he lingered there, his eyes searching hers, as if asking permission for something neither could name. "Lia," he said, his voice rough, like he'd been holding it back too long. Her name on his lips was a caress, and she felt it everywhere. Her lips, her neck, the sensitive skin behind her knees. She stepped closer, her breasts brushing his chest, and his hands hovered at her waist, not quite touching, but close enough that she could feel their warmth. Her body was a live wire, every nerve singing, and she wanted to close the distance, to feel his lips on hers, his hands on her skin, pulling her apart and putting her back together. But he didn't kiss her, not yet. Instead, he smiled, that dimple flashing, and stepped back, leaving her breathless and aching. "Come on," he said, nodding toward the bike. "Let's get you back before I do something stupid." She laughed, but it was shaky, her body still humming with want. As they rode back to the driftwood, her arms around him again. She felt the summer in her veins, bright, fleeting, and alive. Theo was a storm she couldn't predict, and she was already caught in his current, tumbling towards something she couldn't name but couldn't resist. Back at the homestay, they parted with a lingering glance, his eyes promising more, her smile an invitation. Lia slipped into her room, her body still warm from his nearness, her skin tingling where his fingers had grazed her. She stood by the window, the ocean, a dark expanse beyond, and ran her hands over her arms, imagining his touch, those artist's hands, rough yet precise, mapping her like one of his sketches. Next door, Theo sat on his bed, sketchbook open, but he didn't draw. He closed his eyes, picturing her, the curve of her lips, the dip of her waist, the way her eyes held a fire that could burn him alive. The wall between their rooms was thin, and he wondered if she could hear his heartbeat, as loud as the waves outside. The summer stretched before them, a canvas of unplanned afternoons, each one a brushstroke in a story neither could stop writing. They were strangers, yes, but strangers who fit together like poetry, raw, beautiful, and destined to fade. The Santa Cruz night was alive with whispers, soft crash of waves, the rustle of palm fronds, the hum of distant music from the boardwalk. Lia Nguyen sat alone on the beach below the driftwood, her bare feet buried in the cool, damp sand. The moon hung low, a silver crescent casting a ghostly glow over the Pacific, its light tracing the edges of her silhouette like a lover's touch. At 27, Lia was no stranger to solitude, but tonight it felt heavier, laced with a longing she couldn't name. Her heart, still tender from a breakup that had left her questioning her worth, thrummed with a new rhythm that had started the moment she met Theo Rivera. She wore a thin, white cotton dress, its neckline slipping slightly to reveal the delicate curve of her shoulder, the fabric clinging to her petite frame like a second skin. The breeze teased the hem, lifting it to brush against her thighs, smooth and toned from years of yoga, their golden brown hue shimmering under the moonlight. Her dark hair, loose now, cascaded over her shoulders in waves, catching the light like polished obsidian, and a few strands danced across her face, grazing her full lips that were soft, coral-painted, and parted slightly as she exhaled. Her almond-shaped eyes, framed by lashes that curled like poetry, stared out at the ocean, their depths reflecting the moon's glow, and something deeper, a hunger, a spark, a quiet fire. Lia's body was a symphony of soft contrast, slender yet strong, her hips curving gently, her collarbone, a delicate ridge that invited the eye to linger. She was the kind of beautiful that didn't demand attention but stole it anyway, the kind that made you want to reach out, to feel the warmth of her skin, to know the weight of her gaze. She hugged her knees to her chest, her fingers tracing idle patterns in the sand, and let her thoughts drift to Theo. His face was a vivid imprint in her mind, those gray-green eyes, sharp and stormy, that seemed to see straight through her, that dimple, boyish and disarming, flashing when he smiled. The way his voice, low and gravelly, wrapped around her name like a caress. She thought of his body, the broad shoulders, the lean, muscular frame, the tattoos that told stories she ached to unravel. Her skin tingled at the memory of his touch, fleeting but electric, the brush of his fingers when they shared a coffee, the heat of his waist under her palms on that motorcycle ride. She closed her eyes, imagining his hand scalloped, strong yet impossibly delicate, tracing the curve of her neck, the dip of her waist, the sensitive skin behind her knees. The thought sent a shiver through her, warm and liquid, pooling low in her belly. She didn't hear him approach, but she felt he must shift in the air, a warmth that cut through the night's chill. Theo Rivera stood a few feet away, his silhouette sharp against the moonlit sea, his presence as undeniable as the tide. At 30, he was a nomad, a tattoo artist whose life was a tapestry of fleeting moments and inked memories. But tonight, he was here, drawn to her like a moth to flame. He wore a black tank top that hugged his torso, revealing the taut planes of his chest, the ripple of muscle in his arms, and the tattoos that danced across his skin. A serpent coiling around his forearm, a constellation of stars dusting his collarbone, each one a secret she wanted to trace with her lips. His faded jeans hung low on his hips, hinting at the lean strength of his thighs, and his dark hair, tousled by the wind, fell into his eyes that burned with an intensity that made her breath catch. His jaw, shadowed with stubble, was sharp enough to cut glass, and his lips, full and slightly chapped, curved into a half smile as he watched her, that dimple flashing like a promise. "Lia," he said, his voice soft but resonant, carrying over the waves. He didn't ask if he could join her, he simply sat, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, far enough that the space between them felt charged, alive with possibility. The sand shifted under his weight, and she noticed his hands, those artist's hands, long-fingered and scarred, resting on his knees, their knuckles dusted with faint charcoal smudges. She imagined those hands on her, steady and sure, mapping her like one of his sketches, and the thought made her pulse race, her lips parting as she inhaled the salt-soaked air. They didn't speak at first, the silence between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke louder than words, filled with the rhythm of their breathing, the crash of the waves, the unspoken things that hung in the air like stars. Lia glanced at him, her eyes tracing the line of his profile, the high cheekbones, the faint scar above his eyebrow, the way his eyelashes cast soft shadows on his cheeks. Up close, Theo was devastating. His skin, bronzed and warm, glowed under the moonlight, and his scent cedarwood, leather, and salt wrapped around her like a blanket. She wanted to lean closer, to feel the stubble on his jaw against her cheek, to taste the salt on his lips. Her body hummed with awareness, her breasts pressing against the thin fabric of her dress, her thighs shifting slightly as she adjusted her position, the motion drawing his gaze. He noticed, and his eyes darkened, a storm brewing in their depths. "You're making it hard to behave," he said, his voice a low rumble, laced with a playful edge, but heavy with want. His gaze lingered on her lips, then drifted lower to the curve of her neck, the soft swell of her chest, the way her dress clung to her hips. Her skin flushed under his scrutiny, a warm tide spreading from her cheeks to her collarbone, and she felt exposed, but not in a way that made her want to hide exposed, in a way that made her want to be seen, to be touched, to be known. She laughed, the sound soft and shaky, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her fingers trembling slightly. "You're not exactly playing fair either," she said, her voice teasing but breathless. She let her eyes roam over him, unapologetic, the broad expanse of his shoulders, the way his tank top strained against his chest, the faint trail of dark hair disappearing into his jeans. His body was a canvas, every line and curve a testament to a life lived fiercely, and she wanted to explore it, to memorize the weight of him, the heat of him, the taste of him. Theo reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, a cracked old thing that looked like it had seen too many beaches. "Music?" he asked, his eyes meeting hers, and she nodded, her smile shy but eager. He scrolled through a playlist, his fingers moving with that same precision she'd seen in his sketches, and soon, the soft strums of an indie song filled the air, something wistful and raw, like the night itself. The melody wove around them, a thread tying their silence together, and Lia felt it in her chest, a pull that made her want to close the distance, to let the music carry her to him. They lay back on the sand, side by side, their shoulders inches apart, the moon above them a quiet witness. The grains were cool against Lia's skin, a contrast to the warmth of Theo's presence, and she turned her head to look at him, her hair fanning out like a dark halo. His face was close, too close, his breath warm against her cheek, and she could see the flecks of green in his eyes, the faint lines at their corners that spoke of laughter and late nights. His lips were parted, and she imagined kissing them, soft at first, then hungry, her hands in his hair, his hands on her waist, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. "You ever feel like you're running out of time?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, the words spilling out before she could stop them. She didn't know why she said it. Maybe it was the moon, or the music, or the way he looked at her, like she was the only thing that mattered. He turned his head, his eyes locking onto hers, and the intensity in them made her heart stutter. "All the time," he said, his voice rough, like he was confessing something he'd never said aloud. "But right now, it feels like time standing still." Her breath caught, and she felt the air shift, the space between them shrinking, charged with a current that made her skin prickle. Theo propped himself up on one elbow, his body angled toward her, and the motion made his tank top ride up slightly, revealing a sliver of skin-taut, bronzed, with a faint scar curving across his hip. Her eyes lingered there, and she imagined tracing it with her fingertips, feeling the warmth of him, the pulse beneath his skin. Her own body responded, her breasts heavy, her thighs pressing together as a wave of heat rolled through her. "Lia," he said, and her name was a prayer, a plea, a promise. He leaned closer, his face inches from hers, and she could feel his breath, warm and unsteady, mingling with her own. His hand hovered near her cheek, not quite touching, but close enough that she felt its heat, its weight, its intention. Her lips parted, her eyes fluttering closed, and she leaned into him, her body moving before her mind could catch up, drawn to him like a tide to the shore. "I know one thing," he said, his voice low, almost a growl, and it sent a shiver down her spine, straight to her core. "If I don't kiss you tonight, I'll regret it for the rest of this summer." Her eyes opened, meeting his, and what she saw there, hunger, vulnerability, a storm of wanted her. She smiled, a smile that was half sad, half drunk on the moment, and whispered, "Then don't." It was all the permission he needed. Theo closed the distance, his lips finding hers, and the world fell away. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like they were testing the weight of it, the taste of it. His lips were warm, slightly rough, and they moved against hers with a reverence that made her heart ache. She tasted salt, coffee, and something uniquely him, and it was intoxicating, like a drug she never wanted to quit. Her hands found his face, her fingers brushing the stubble on his jaw, the soft waves of his hair, and she pulled him closer, deepening the kiss, her lips parting to let him in. He groaned, a low, primal sound that vibrated through her, and his hand slid to her waist, his fingers splaying across the curve of her hip, pulling her against him. His touch was firm but gentle, his palm warm through the thin fabric of her dress, and she arched into him, her breasts pressing against his chest, her body alive with need. The sand shifted beneath them, cool and grounding, but nothing could anchor her now. She was lost in him, in the heat of his mouth, the strength of his hands, the way his body fit against hers like it was made for her. The kiss grew hungrier, more desperate, their breaths mingling, their hands exploring. Lia's fingers traced the lines of his shoulders, the hard muscle beneath his skin, and she felt him shudder, his grip tightening on her hip. Theo's lips moved to her jaw, then her neck, and she gasped, her head tilting back as he kissed the sensitive skin there, his stubble grazing her in a way that sent sparks through her veins. Her neck was a map of nerves, and he navigated it with precision, his lips soft, his teeth grazing just enough to make her moan, a sound she didn't recognize as her own. The ocean roared in the distance, the moon watched in silence, and the music played on, a soft indie melody that wove their moment into something timeless. Lia's hands slid under his tank top, her fingers brushing the warm, taut skin of his back, and she felt the scars there, the stories etched into him, and she wanted to know them all. Theo's hand slid higher, cupping her face, his thumb brushing her cheek, and when he pulled back to look at her, his eyes were dark, endless, filled with a longing that mirrored her own. "Lia," he whispered, and it was her name, but it was also a question, a confession, a vow. She smiled, her lips swollen, her cheeks flushed, and pressed her forehead to his, their breaths mingling in the space between them. Her body was a live wire, every nerve singing, and she wanted more of his lips, his hands, his everything, but the night held them there, suspended in a moment that felt like forever and not enough. They lay back on the sand, side by side, their fingers brushing, their bodies still humming with the aftershocks of the kiss. The moon hung above them, a quiet witness to a night that had changed everything. Lia felt it in her bones, the weight of him, the taste of him, the certainty that this was only the beginning, and the ache that it couldn't last. Theo's hand found hers, his fingers lacing through hers, and the touch was simple but profound, a tether in a world that felt too big, too fleeting. The night stretched on, and they stayed there, wrapped in music, moonlight, and each other, two strangers who had found something rare, a connection that burned bright like a summer storm, and carried the promise of both joy and heartbreak. The waves crashed, the stars blinked, and Lia knew, with a clarity that scared her, that she was falling, tumbling into him, into a season she'd never forget. The Santa Cruz night pulsed with a rhythm all its own, the ocean's ceaseless murmur blending with the faint hum of crickets and the distant echo of a guitar from somewhere down the beach. Lia Nguyen and Theo Rivera walked back to the driftwood, their steps slow, as if prolonging the inevitable. The moon, a silver crescent, hung low, casting their shadows long and entwined across the sand. Their kiss on the beach, an electric, soul-deep collision of lips and longing, had left them both unsteady, their bodies humming with a need that words couldn't contain. Lia's hand brushed Theo's as they climbed the wooden steps to the homestay, and the contact, fleeting but deliberate, sent a spark through her, igniting every nerve. Lia was 27, a food stylist whose life in San Francisco had been a carefully curated plate, now shattered by a breakup that had left her raw. But here, Under the coastal sky, she felt alive, her body a canvas of sensation. She wore the same white cotton dress from the beach, its thin fabric clinging to her petite frame, the neckline slipping to reveal the delicate curve of her shoulder, the hem teasing the smooth expanse of her thighs. Her legs, toned from yoga, moved with a quiet grace, their golden brown skin shimmering under the moonlight. Her dark hair, loose and slightly damp from the sea air, fell in waves over her shoulders, framing a face that was both soft and fierce lemon-shaped eyes, framed by lashes that curled like calligraphy, burning with a quiet fire, full lips, coral, painted and swollen from Theo's kiss, parted slightly as she breathed. Her body was a study in contrasts, slender yet strong, her hips curving gently, her breasts pressing against the dress's soft fabric, their outline a subtle invitation. Lia's beauty was the kind that crept into your bones, the kind that made you want to trace every curve, to feel the warmth of her skin, to drown in the depth of her gaze. Theo, at 30, was a nomad, a tattoo artist whose life was a mosaic of fleeting towns and inked stories. But tonight, he was tethered to her, his storm cloud eyes fixed on her like she was the only thing keeping him grounded. He wore a black tank top that hugged his lean, muscular frame, revealing the taut planes of his chest, the ripple of muscle in his arms, and the tattoos that danced across his skin. A serpent coiling around his forearm, a constellation of stars dusting his collarbone, each one a secret she longed to unravel. His faded jeans hung low on his hips, hinting at the lean strength of his thighs, and his dark hair, tousled by the wind, fell into his eyes that were gray-green and piercing, now dark with a hunger that made her pulse race. His jaw, shadowed with stubble, was sharp enough to cut glass, and his lips, full and slightly chapped, curved into a half smile as he glanced at her, that dimple flashing like a spark. His hand scalloped, strong, yet impossibly delicate, flexed at his sides, as if fighting the urge to reach for her. Theo's body was a canvas of lived experience, every line and scar a testament to a life of movement, and she wanted to explore it, to memorize the weight of him, the heat of him, the taste of him. They reached the homestay's porch, the air thick with the scent of cedar and salt. Lia's room was first, its door painted a faded blue, and she paused, her fingers grazing the knob, her heart a wild drum in her chest. She turned to him, her eyes meeting his, and what she saw there, desire, vulnerability, a storm of want undid her. "Theo," she said, her voice soft but steady, a question and an invitation woven into his name. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, the faint tremor in his breath. "Lia," he said, his voice low, rough, like he was holding back a tide. His hand lifted, hovering near her cheek, and the anticipation of his touch was almost as potent as the touch itself. "Tell me to walk away," he said, but his eyes were pleading for the opposite, and she felt it in her chorea pole, a need, a certainty that this moment was theirs, no matter what came after. She didn't speak. Instead, she pushed the door open and stepped inside, her eyes never leaving his. It was all the permission he needed. He followed, the door closing softly behind them, and the world outside the ocean, the moon. The night faded to a distant hum. The room was small, bathed in the warm glow of a single lamp, its light spilling across the white linen bed, the wooden floor, the walls adorned with mismatched art. A window stood open, letting in the sea breeze, and the faint strains of an indie playlist drifted from Lia's phone, left on the nightstand a soft, haunting melody that wove their moment into something sacred. Lia turned to face him, her back to the bed, and the space between them crackled, charged with a current that made her skin prickle. Theo stepped closer, his hands finding her waist, his fingers splaying across the curve of her hips, pulling her gently toward him. His touch was firm but reverent, his palms warm through the thin fabric of her dress, and she arched into him, her breasts pressing against his chest, her body alive with need. Up close, he was devastating. His skin, bronzed and warm, glowed in the lamplight, and his scent cedarwood, leather, and salt wrapped around her like a blanket. She reached up, her fingers brushing the stubble on his jaw, the soft waves of his hair, and he leaned into her touch, his eyes fluttering closed for a moment, as if savoring the feel of her. "Lia," he whispered, and her name was a prayer, a plea, a vow. His lips found hers, and the kiss was different from the beach-hungrier, more desperate, a collision of need and surrender. His lips were warm, slightly rough, and they moved against hers with a precision that made her knees weak, parting to deepen the kiss, his tongue brushing hers in a way that sent sparks through her veins. She tasted salt, coffee, and him, and it was intoxicating, like a drug she never wanted to quit. Her hands slid to his shoulders, her fingers digging into the hard muscle there, and she felt him shudder, his grip tightening on her hips, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. The music played on, a soft indie strum that matched the rhythm of their breaths, and the room felt like a cocoon, a world where only they existed. Theo's hands moved, one sliding up her back, his fingers tracing the curve of her spine through the dress, the other cupping her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. Her skin was soft, flawless, and he lingered there, his touch both tender and possessive, as if memorizing her. She arched into him, her breasts heavy, their peaks hardening against the fabric, and he groaned, a low, primal sound that vibrated through her, pooling low in her belly. His lips left hers, trailing to her jaw, then her neck, and she gasped, her head tilting back as he kissed the sensitive skin there, his stubble grazing her in a way that sent shivers down her spine. Her neck was a map of nerves, and he navigated it with care, his lips soft, his teeth grazing just enough to make her moan, a sound she didn't recognize as her own. Her hands slid under his tank top, her fingers brushing the warm, taut skin of his back, and she felt the scars there, the stories etched into him, and she wanted to know them all. His skin was hot, the muscles beneath it flexing under her touch, and she traced the lines of him, the dip of his spine, the curve of his hip, each touch a question, each response a promise. Theo pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes dark, endless, filled with a longing that mirrored her own. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice rough, and the words were simple but heavy, landing in her chest like stones in a still pond. She smiled, her lips swollen, her cheeks flushed, and reached for the hem of his tank top, tugging it up and over his head. He let her, his arms lifting, and the motion revealed the full expanse of his torso-lean, muscular, a canvas of tattoos and scars that told a life of wandering. His chest was broad, the skin warm and bronzed, and she traced the constellation of stars across his collarbone, her fingers lingering on the faint scar that curved across his ribs, imagining the story behind it. He watched her, his breath uneven, and when her fingers brushed lower, grazing the trail of dark hair that disappeared into his jeans, he caught her wrist, his grip gentle but firm. "Slow," he said, but his voice was strained, and she saw the effort it took, the way his jaw tightened, his eyes burning with want. She nodded, her smile teasing, and stepped back, her hands moving to the straps of her dress. She slipped them off her shoulders, letting the fabric slide down her body, pooling at her feet, and stood before him in nothing but a simple white bra and panties, her skin glowing in the lamplight. Theo's breath caught, his eyes roaming over her, taking in every detail: the curve of her breasts, the soft dip of her waist, the gentle flare of her hips, the smooth expanse of her thighs. Her body was a poem, every line and curve a verse, and he looked at her like she was art, like he wanted to spend a lifetime learning her. "Lia," he said, and it was her name, but it was also a confession, a vow, a plea. He stepped closer, his hands finding her waist, pulling her against him, and the feel of his skin against hers, warm, rough, alive, was overwhelming, a spark that set her ablaze. They moved to the bed, the white linen cool against their skin, and the world outside faded to nothing. Theo's hands were everywhere: her waist, her hips, the sensitive skin behind her knees, and each touch was deliberate, reverent, like he was worshiping her. Her bra fell away, and his lips found her breasts, kissing the soft curves, the peaks hardening under his touch, and she arched into him, her hands in his hair, pulling him closer. His jeans followed, and she traced the lean strength of his thighs, the hard lines of his hips, her fingers lingering on the scars that marked him, each one a story she wanted to know. The music wove around them, a soft melody that matched the rhythm of their movements, and the sea breeze carried the salt and promise of the ocean. Theo's lips found hers again, and the kiss was slow, deep, a conversation without words. His hands slid lower, tracing the curve of her hips, the soft skin of her inner thighs, and she gasped, her body trembling under his touch. Her own hands explored him, the hard planes of his chest, the taut muscle of his back, and she felt the pulse of him, the heat of him, the certainty that this was right, that this was theirs. Their bodies moved together, a dance of need and surrender, gentle but fierce, poetic but raw. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual, a connection that transcended the moment, that felt like a lifetime lived in hours. Lia felt every touch, every kiss, every breath, and it was overwhelming, beautiful, a wave that carried her under and lifted her up. Theo's eyes never left hers, even as their bodies entwined, and what she saw their love, longing, a quiet promise made her heart ache, even as her body sang. The lamp cast a golden glow over them, the shadows dancing across their skin, and the music played on, a soft indie hymn that held them together. Lia's hands clutched his shoulders, her nails digging into his skin, and he groaned, his lips finding her neck, her jaw, her lips kissing her like she was air and he was drowning. Her body arched, her thighs trembling, and he held her, his arms strong, his touch steady, guiding her through the wave, through the fire, through the storm. When it was over, they lay tangled in the sheets, their bodies slick with sweat, their breaths uneven but synchronized. The ocean roared outside, a reminder of the world beyond, but for now, it was just them two strangers who had found each other, who had lived a lifetime in a single night. Lia rested her head on Theo's chest, her fingers tracing the tattoos there, feeling the steady thud of his heart. His arm wrapped around her, his hand resting on the curve of her hip, and he kissed her forehead, his lips soft, lingering. "Lia," he said, his voice soft, and it was her name, but it was also a thank you, a confession, a goodbye. She smiled, her eyes heavy, and pressed her lips to his chest, tasting the salt of his skin. The music played on, the breeze carried the sea, and they held each other, knowing that this was perfect, that this was enough, that this was everything. The night stretched on, and they stayed there, wrapped in each other, in the music, in the sea, in the fleeting magic of a summer that had changed them both. They were drunk on each other, their bodies sated but their hearts still hungry, and they knew, even then, that this was a moment they'd carry forever, a memory as vivid as the moon, as endless as the tide. The Santa Cruz dawn crept in softly, painting the sky in hues of lavender and gold, the Pacific a restless mirror, reflecting the fleeting beauty of morning. Lia Nguyen stood on the porch of the driftwood, her suitcase at her feet, her heart a tangle of gratitude and grief. At 27, she was a food stylist whose life in San Francisco awaited her plates to arrange, deadlines to meet, a world that demanded her presence, but felt hollow after the summer she'd lived in just a few days. The memory of Theo Rivera's touch, his kiss, his voice, clung to her like the scent of salt on her skin, a reminder of a love that had bloomed bright and burned fast, like a firework against the night sky. She wore a loose linen blouse tucked into high-waisted jeans, the fabric hugging her petite frame, accentuating the gentle curve of her hips, the slender strength of her legs toned from years of yoga. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy bun, tendrils escaping to frame her face, brushing the nape of her neck, a neck that Theo had kissed, its golden brown skin still tingling with the ghost of his lips. Her almond-shaped eyes, framed by lashes that curled like poetry, were soft but heavy, their depths reflecting the ocean's churn and the ache of leaving. Her lips, full and bare of color today, curved into a wistful smile as she gazed at the sea, their softness a reminder of the kisses that had unraveled her. Lia's body was a canvas of quiet beauty, her collarbone, a delicate ridge, her breasts pressing gently against the blouse, her hands delicate but steady as they gripped the porch railing. She was the kind of beautiful that lingered in your heart, the kind that made you want to hold her close, to feel the warmth of her skin, to keep her forever. Theo stood a few feet away, leaning against the homestay's weathered wall, his presence as undeniable as the tide. At 30, he was a nomad, a tattoo artist whose life was a patchwork of fleeting connections, but Lia had been different, a chapter he hadn't planned, a story he'd never forget. He wore a faded gray t-shirt that clung to his lean, muscular frame, revealing the taut planes of his chest, the corded strength of his arms, and the tattoos that danced across his skin. A serpent coiling around his forearm, a constellation of stars dusting his collarbone, each one a secret she'd traced with her fingers. His jeans hung low on his hips, hinting at the lean power of his thighs, and his dark hair, tousled by the morning breeze, fell into his eyes that were gray-green and stormy, now softened with a tenderness that made her chest ache. His jaw, shadowed with stubble, was sharp, and his lips, full and slightly chapped, curved into a half smile as he watched her, that dimple flashing like a fleeting promise. His hands scalloped, strong, yet impossibly delicate, flexed at his sides, as if fighting the urge to reach for her. Theo's body was a map of lived experience, every scar and tattoo a testament to a life of wandering, and she wanted to memorize it, to carry it with her, to keep him close even as she left. The morning was quiet, the only sounds the waves crashing below and the faint creak of the porch under Lia's weight. They hadn't spoken much since waking in her room, their bodies tangled in the white linen sheets, their breaths synchronized in the soft light of dawn. The night before had been a dreamy collision of bodies and souls, a moment where time had stopped, where they'd lived a lifetime in hours. But now, the real world loomed, and Lia's train back to San Francisco was just hours away. She felt it in her bones, the weight of leaving, the certainty that this was goodbye, the hope that it wasn't regret. Theo stepped closer, his boots soft on the wooden planks, and the air between them thickened, charged with the same electricity that had drawn them together that first morning. "Lia," he said, his voice low, rough, like he was holding back a tide. Her name on his lips was a caress, and she felt it everywhere, her lips, her neck, the sensitive skin behind her knees. She turned to face him, her eyes meeting his, and what she saw there, love, longing, a quiet resignation undid her. His face was close, too close, and she could see the flecks of green in his eyes, the faint lines at their corners that spoke of laughter and late nights, the scar above his eyebrow that she'd kissed in the dark. "You don't have to say anything," she said, her voice soft but steady, a smile tugging at her lips. "I know." He nodded, his throat bobbing as he swallowed, and stepped closer still, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, the faint tremor in his breath. His hand lifted, hovering near her cheek, and the anticipation of his touch was almost as potent as the touch itself. When his fingers finally brushed her skin, they were warm, steady, tracing the curve of her jaw, the soft hollow at the base of her throat. Her skin was flawless, glowing in the morning light, and he lingered there, his touch both tender and possessive, as if memorizing her. She leaned into him, her eyes fluttering closed, and for a moment they were back on the beach, under the moon, their lips meeting in a kiss that had changed everything. But this wasn't the beach, and the sun was rising, not setting. Lia opened her eyes, her smile bittersweet, and reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. His hand was rough, the knuckles scarred, but it fit hers perfectly, a tether in a world that was pulling them apart. "I don't regret this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Not a single second. Theo's eyes softened, and he squeezed her hand, his thumb brushing the back of her knuckles. "Neither do I," he said, and his voice was raw, like he was confessing something he'd never said aloud. "You weren't in my plans, Lia. But you're the best part of this summer, the best part of any summer." Her heart ached, a sweet, heavy pain, and she stepped closer, her free hand resting on his chest, feeling the steady thud of his heart beneath the soft fabric of his shirt. His chest was broad, warm, and she traced the constellation of stars across his collarbone, her fingers lingering on the faint scar that curved across his ribs, imagining the story behind it. His body was a canvas, every line and curve a verse, and she wanted to hold on to it, to carry it with her, to keep him in her heart, even as she left. They stood there, wrapped in the morning's quiet, their bodies close, their hands entwined, and Lia felt the summer in her veins, bright, fleeting, and alive. She thought of their afternoons, their motorcycle ride, their night under the moon, their bodies moving together in a dance of need and surrender. She thought of his laugh, his sketches, the way he looked at her like she was art, like he wanted to spend a lifetime learning her. And she knew, with a clarity that scared her, that she was leaving a piece of herself here with him on this coast in this season. Theo reached into his pocket and pulled out a small sketchbook, its pages worn and smudged with charcoal. He flipped it open to a drawing a delicate wave curling around a crescent moon. Simple but striking, its lines bold yet fluid, like the ocean itself. "For you," he said, tearing the page out and handing it to her. "Something to remember this by." She took it, her fingers brushing his, and the contact was electric, a spark that made her lips tingle. The drawing was beautiful, a piece of him, and she traced the lines with her fingertip, imagining his hand guiding the charcoal, his eyes focused, his heart in every stroke. "It's perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I don't need a drawing to remember you." He smiled, that dimple flashing, and leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers. Their breaths mingled, warm and unsteady, and she closed her eyes, savoring the feel of him, his warmth, his scent, his presence. His lips brushed hers, a soft, fleeting kiss that was more goodbye than promise, and she felt it in her chest, a pang that was both joy and sorrow. They pulled back, their hands still clasped, and Lia glanced at her suitcase, the reality of departure settling like a stone in her stomach. "I have to go," she said, her voice barely audible, and he nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know," he said, and there was no promise in his voice, no vow to follow, no plea to stay. Theo was a wanderer, a man who lived for the season and left when it ended, and Lia was a woman with a life waiting, a world that needed her even if it didn't feel like home. But there was no regret, no anger, only a quiet acceptance that this was enough, that this was everything. They walked to the edge of the porch, the ocean stretching before them, a vast, endless expanse that seemed to hold their story in its depths. Theo reached for her one last time, his hands framing her face, and kissed her again, slow, deep, a kiss that said everything they couldn't. Her lips parted, her hands clutching his shirt, and she tasted salt, coffee, and him, a taste she'd carry forever. When they pulled apart, her cheeks were wet, and he brushed the tears away with his thumbs, his touch gentle, his eyes soft. "Write it down," he said, his voice a low rumble. "What this was, what we were." She nodded, her smile shaky but genuine. "I will," she said. And then, because she couldn't help it, she added, "You too." He grinned, that boyish, disarming grin, and handed her a folded piece of paper. "Already did," he said, and she tucked it into her pocket, not trusting herself to read it now, not when her heart was already breaking. Lia picked up her suitcase, her fingers tightening around the handle, and took a step back, her eyes locked on his. "Goodbye, Theo," she said. And the words were heavy, but they were honest, and they were hers. "Goodbye, Lia," he said, and his voice was steady, but his eyes were a storm, and she knew he felt it toothache, the love, the memory of a summer that had changed them both. She turned and walked down the path, the gravel crunching under her sneakers, the ocean roaring in her ears. She didn't look back, not because she didn't want to, but because she knew if she did, she'd run to him, and this wasn't a story about staying. It was a story about living, about loving, about letting go. At the train station, Lia sat on a bench, the platform quiet except for the hum of an approaching train. She pulled the folded paper from her pocket, her fingers trembling as she opened it. It was a note written in Theo's slanted, charcoal-smudged handwriting. "Meeting you wasn't in my schedule, but it's the most beautiful part. Keep making art, Lia. Keep being you." Her eyes stung, but she smiled, folding the note carefully and tucking it into her wallet next to the sketch of the wave and moon. She reached for her wrist, where a small tattoo now marked her skeina delicate wave curling around a crescent moon, inked by Theo's hand the night before, a secret they'd shared in the quiet hours after love. The tattoo was small, barely noticeable, but it was hers, a piece of him she'd carry forever, a reminder of a summer that had taught her to feel, to love, to live. The train pulled in, its brakes hissing, and Lia boarded, her suitcase in tow. She found a window seat, the glass cool against her cheek, and watched as Santa Cruz faded into the distance, the cliffs and sea blurring into a memory. Her heart was heavy, but it was full, and she knew, with a quiet certainty, that she was leaving stronger than she'd arrived. Theo had been a storm, a tide, a season, and though they couldn't keep each other, they'd given each other something rare, a love that didn't need to last to be real. Back at the driftwood, Theo stood on the porch, his hands in his pockets, his eyes on the horizon. He didn't watch her go, he couldn't, but he felt her absence, a hollow space where her laugh, her touch, her fire had been. He pulled out his sketchbook, flipping to a blank page, and began to draw a woman with dark hair and fierce eyes, standing by the sea, her silhouette framed by the moon. It wasn't enough, but it was something, a way to hold on to her, to keep her alive, in the only way he knew how. The sun rose higher, the ocean churned, and Santa Cruz moved on, as it always did. Two strangers, one summer, a love that didn't promise forever but gave it anyway, in stolen moments, in shared breaths, in a tattoo that whispered of waves and moons. They were apart now, but they were whole, and that was the gift of a love like theirs, brief, beautiful, and unforgettable. The San Francisco autumn was sharp, a crisp bite in the air that carried the scent of eucalyptus and city smoke. Lia Nguyen sat at a corner table in a bustling Mission District cafe, the kind with exposed brick walls and mismatched chairs, where the hum of conversation mingled with the hiss of an espresso machine. At 27, she was back in her world of food stylist, shaping edible art, her days filled with microgreens and perfectly angled light. But the summer in Santa Cruz lingered in her, like a song she couldn't stop humming, its notes etched into her skin, her heart, her bones. Theo Rivera was a memory now, a vivid, aching imprint that colored her quiet moments, and though she'd left him behind, he was never far from her thoughts. She wore a soft cream sweater that slipped off one shoulder, revealing the delicate curve of her collarbone, its golden brown skin glowing under the cafe's warm light. Her dark hair was loose, falling in waves that framed her face, brushing the nape of her neck, a neck that still remembered Theo's kisses, its sensitivity a secret only she knew. Her almond-shaped eyes, framed by lashes that curled like calligraphy, were focused on a sketch pad open before her, where she'd drawn a plate of figs and burrata, the lines precise but infused with a new softness, a hint of the wildness she'd found by the sea. Her lips, full and painted a soft rose, curved into a faint smile as she worked, their softness a reminder of a night when time had stopped. Lia's body was a poem of quiet strength, her slender frame, her hips curving gently under high-waisted trousers, her hands delicate but steady as they guided the pencil. She was the kind of beautiful that didn't shout but whispered, the kind that made you want to lean closer, to feel the warmth of her skin, to know the stories behind her gaze. The cafe's windows were fogged with condensation, and outside, the city moved in a blur of umbrellas, and headlights. Lia sipped her flat white, the bitterness grounding her, and let her mind drift to Santa Cruz, the cliffs, the waves, the man who'd changed her in ways she was still discovering. Theo Rivera, with his storm cloud eyes and artist's hands, had been a tide she couldn't outrun, a season she hadn't planned but would never trade. She glanced at her wrist, where a small tattoo marked her skin, a delicate wave curling around a crescent moon, inked by Theo's hand in the quiet hours of their last night. It was barely noticeable, a secret shared between them, but it was hers, a piece of him she carried through the city's chaos, a reminder that she'd loved fiercely and freely, even if only for a summer. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back, and she glanced at the screen. An Instagram notification, a new post from an account she hadn't seen in months, at Theo Rivera. Her heart stuttered, a wild, reckless beat, and she hesitated, her thumb hovering over the icon. The cafe's music shifted, a haunting indie track that echoed the one they'd played on the beach, and it felt like a sign, a thread connecting her to that moonlit night. She tapped the screen, and there it was, a photo of a tattoo on a stranger's arm, a wave, and a moon identical to hers, the lines bold yet fluid, signed with Theo's unmistakable flourish. The caption was simple, "For the tides that carry us." Lia's breath caught, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. The tattoo wasn't hers, but it was theirs, a piece of their story inked onto someone else, a sign that Theo was still out there, still creating, still carrying their summer in his own way. She scrolled through his profile, her eyes tracing the image sketches of cliffs, tattoos of stars, a blurry photo of a motorcycle parked by the sea. There was no trace of his face, no hint of where he was, but each post felt like a whisper, a message meant for her, or maybe just a reminder that he was alive, that he was still him. She typed a comment, her fingers trembling. "You're still out there, huh?" She hit send before she could overthink it, her heart racing as the words disappeared into the ether. The cafe hummed around her, oblivious to the storm in her chest, and she leaned back, her eyes drifting to the window, where the city's lights blurred into a kaleidoscope of color. The music played on summertime sadness, its melancholy chords wrapping around her like a familiar embrace, and she smiled, a small, private smile that held both joy and ache. There was no reply, no notification, just the quiet certainty that Theo was somewhere, under a different sky, sketching, inking, wandering, and that was enough. Knowing he was out there, still making art, still carrying their story in his hands, was enough. Lia closed her sketchpad, her fingers brushing the page where she'd tucked Theo's note, the one he'd given her on their last day. "Meeting you wasn't in my schedule, but it's the most beautiful part. Keep making art, Lia. Keep being you." She hadn't read it in weeks, but she didn't need to. The words were part of her now, woven into the way she moved, the way she saw the world. The summer had changed her, softened her edges, taught her that love didn't need to last to be real, that some stories were beautiful because they ended, because they left you fuller than you'd been before. She stood, slinging her bag over her shoulder, and stepped into the city, the cool air kissing her skin. The streets were alive with possibility, and Lia felt it in her bones, a spark, a hunger, a quiet strength she hadn't known she had. She was different now, not because of Theo alone, but because of what they'd been together, what they'd given each other in stolen moments by the sea. Her tattoo itched faintly, a reminder of waves and moons, and she smiled, her eyes scanning the horizon as if she might see him there, leaning against a lamppost, his dimple flashing. Somewhere, Theo Rivera was moving through the world, his sketchbook in hand, his heart a little heavier, a little fuller. He might be in a coastal town, inking a stranger's skin, or riding a motorcycle down a desert highway, the wind carrying the scent of salt and freedom. He didn't check Instagram often, his life was too transient for that. But when he did, hours or days later, he'd see her comment, "You're still out there, huh?" And he'd pause, his fingers tracing the screen, his storm cloud eyes softening. He wouldn't reply, not because he didn't want to, but because some things were better left unsaid, left to the tides that carried them. But he'd sketch her again, her silhouette by the sea, her hair catching the moonlight, and he'd carry her with him, just as she carried him. The city hummed, the ocean roared in her memory, and Lia walked on, her heart open, her story unfinished. She didn't know if their paths would cross again, maybe in another summer, another life, another season by the sea. Maybe they'd meet in a crowded cafe, their eyes locking across the room, or on a beach at dusk, their laughter mingling with the waves. Or maybe they'd stay strangers, tied only by a tattoo, a note, a memory that burned bright. The future was a question mark, a wave yet to crash, and that uncertainty was beautiful, a promise of more to come, of stories waiting to be told. And there, dear listener, is where we leave Lia and Thea for now. Their summer was a spark, a storm, a season that changed them, but what happens next? Will they find each other again, drawn by the tides that bind them? Or will they carry their love as a quiet flame, lighting their separate paths? The answer lies beyond the horizon, in a story yet to unfold. If you're curious, if you're aching to know where the waves take them, join me on my channel for the next chapter. Subscribe, stay tuned, and let's discover together what happens when summer ends, but the heart keeps wandering. Until then, keep chasing your own tides, your own moons, your own unforgettable loves. The cafe's music faded, the city's lights blinked, and Lia stepped into the night, her silhouette a faint echo of a woman by the sea, her heart a canvas of waves and dreams. Somewhere, Theo sketched under a different sky, his hands steady, his soul tethered to a summer he'd never forget, and the world turned, carrying their story forward, into the unknown, into the next,